Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's live. I am super excited to have my former colleague and good friend, Joe, join us today. Recently launched a series on honest work conversations. So, the aim of this series is just to encourage raw, honest conversations on what really happens at the workplace. And without further ado, I will hand over to you, Joe, to introduce yourself.
Hey, thanks, Belinda. So nice to be on here with you. Hi everyone. My name is Joe. I am a senior manager at one of the big four accountancy firms. I live in Birmingham. I'm of Zambian heritage, and I work in communications and have done for over a decade now, which is quite scary to say. But yeah, really happy to be here and to chat with you, Belinda.
No, thank you for joining us. And in fact, we were discussing just before we actually went live that we should probably twist this around and next time have you put me on the hot seat and have a conversation and a chat. But I'm really happy to have you here. And before we get into the nitty gritty, whoever is watching, if you can just put in the comment section where you're joining us from, confirm that you can hear us okay. I'll also just type there. Just in case anyone joins after to just confirm whether you can hear us. And at any point during the discussion, if you can't hear any of us, just give us a shout and we'll try to sort it out. Because, in this era of remote working, joining from home, technical difficulties, it's all very possible. So I'm joining from Walsall. Joe, are you joining us from, the West Midlands or?
Yeah, so I'm in Birmingham, although I live in Birmingham and I'm at home today, which is kind of rare because I'm often in London with work quite a lot. But yeah, I'm in Birmingham today, so it's great to be here.
Perfect. And I can see a few of us joining. So George is joining from Manchester. Welcome, George. And as the rest join, we'll try and engage. It should be a very interactive session. So please give us a shout on any questions that you have, and we'll make sure to give you a shout out. Okay. So Joe, we'll get started. If you can just tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, any interesting facts, and also maybe a bit about like your educational background before we get into the career story.
Sure. Okay. So Joe, as you know, I work for one of the big four, have done for just over 7 years now. Feels like quite a long time, but it's also gone quite quickly. Outside of work, though, I am a bit of a fitness enthusiast. I have a Peloton bike, which I got during lockdown just to try and kind of get into a routine. Have become obsessed with that, but then also love sugar and chocolate and all the bad things. Try and balance one out with the other.
Yeah.
In terms of my background, so I'm Zambian. I've grown up here. So I was born in Zambia, moved here with my parents when we were young, and have grown up here predominantly in the West Midlands, and then went to university in Portsmouth for 2 years. And then I did a placement year. So I worked for the BMW Group, the mini plant, which is based in Oxford, for a year, doing internal communications. And then I transferred whilst I was doing that placement from Portsmouth University to Hull University. So my actual degree is from Hull University, even though I did the first 2 years at Portsmouth, if that makes sense. I studied marketing, did the bachelor's there, and the placement really was where I would say that I kind of found what I wanted to do. So even though I studied marketing, I kind of like when choosing what to do, kind of after my A levels, I was a bit like, what was I good at? What did I sort of enjoy? Marketing as a career choice, I wasn't like amazing, I want to do that. But because I found it fairly easy, I thought, let me do that. At least I know I'll do it well. And then it kind of led to like the rest of the journey. That's kind of where we got to, and then entered the world of work after finishing my degree, and had, a few kind of entry level kind of grad jobs, and then gradually got into communications, which is, where I am now.
Perfect. And just when you touched on that, I'm interested to know because a career in marketing and then working for an accountancy firm, where did the two come together? Because most people in marketing, you'd be expecting them to be working for, what you'd call the fun companies. So how did you find yourself at a Big Four?
Um, I think because I guess if you think about, every company will need marketing, every company will need communications at some point. So in theory, you can work anywhere doing what I do or doing what a marketer does. But in terms of how I got into it, so my first role, I actually did a grad scheme with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, which is not on my CV because like I wasn't there for very long, and also it was quite intense.
Yeah.
It was more kind of salesy, and I felt that it wasn't aligned to what I was, wanting to do. So I did that for about 6 months, and then I got a job with a train company in Birmingham doing internal communications. So comms is kind of within the family of marketing, but just for the viewers to explain the difference, communications is more about communicating either internally, so to the people in the company and engaging with them, or externally, and that can be with journalists and with media, and basically making sure that the company's voice is being heard, and you're out there being seen as experts. So when you see, for example, the chief exec of a company on Sky News or something like that, that's exactly what the communications person will be doing. So marketing is slightly different in that it's more about kind of branding, advertorials, like paid for content. So the company is saying what it wants to say, but typically there's a big budget behind that, and they're pushing things. So you'll see ads on TV or in the underground on the billboards and things like that. And lots of other stuff, of course, but they're very kind of distinct. Whereas comms, it's free. Like we have to work to get what we get rather than pay for what we're saying to be kind of printed. So I, like, through the kind of internal comms route, and I think the experience that I had as a placement student really helped me to get that job at the train company, which I worked for a year. I then moved to an engineering and design consultancy where I did internal communications, and then I could see what they were doing in the external communication space, and I thought, I want a bit of that. I want to know how to do that. So I gradually started getting more and more work from that team, which enabled me to become a cross communications professional. So to do both internal and external, as typically you find like comms professionals tend to do one or the other. But you do find sometimes you get people who do both. So I picked up skills kind of through that, did that for 3 years. And that company also paid for me to do a diploma in PR, so public relations, to kind of bolster that external comms expertise. And then I got the job with the firm that I'm at now. So that's kind of how I segued into it. But you can kind of, you need it anywhere you go. So you can kind of, work anywhere technically.
No, thanks for that. Because from where I'm at, I'm like very far from marketing or PR or comms. So to me, it's like all one bucket, but you've been able to explain that really well. So for those of you who are joining just now, Jo is our first guest when it comes to honest work conversations. And we're going to open up our discussion to get into more about the nitty-gritty about her career path. So please, please, please raise your questions in the chat. She's just talking about her background and how she got into basically working for an accountancy firm, but in comms, from her degree in marketing, which is what she studied at Portsmouth, and then moved to Hull University. And you did a placement, which is really good because I did a placement as well. And I think I can definitely attest to the importance of doing placements in terms of setting you apart when you're going to apply for those grad jobs or entry-level jobs after uni. But yeah, I think you touched on it a little bit on what you do day to day, but maybe in layman's terms, if you can just describe a typical day at work for you, what does that usually entail?
Okay, so no 2 days are the same. It can honestly be, I wake up, being in kind of the external communication space, I have to be on top of what's happening in the media because that often will dictate what we're doing as well. So if there's an economic announcement, if there's like, say, budget day and they're announcing sort of tax changes or something like that, we have to be across that as a comms team because oftentimes there'll be something in kind of the news agenda that we can either contribute to as experts or that we can help to sort of shape. So it could be, I wake up, check the news, check what's going on in terms of the coverage that we've received overnight. And then there could be a few journalist inquiries based on whatever's happening that day. There could also be risk issues. So as communicators, particularly from an external point of view, we are seen as brand guardians and almost like a second line of defense, if you like. So when things go wrong as well, we're advisors essentially. So we work often with legal, we work often with, whichever part of the business may be impacted, to help kind of craft the messages and to deliver those and to kind of brief who we need to brief, whether it be journalists or whoever, on how we're going to kind of manage the risk of whatever's happening and how we're going to communicate, our response or kind of reaction to that thing. But yeah, it could be writing press releases. It could be, doing media training with spokespeople, like essentially briefing them on what to say. So the way that I like to describe what I do is the people that you see quoted in the paper or online in news outlets or on TV, we are the people, I'm the person behind the camera or the person behind that person that's speaking. So I will be drafting what they're saying. They'll obviously sign it off, but like the person who's drafting that thing is essentially the external comms person, and the person who's kind of briefed them on how to kind of navigate and answer questions will be the external communications person. So we're kind of like the hidden people, but we're the ones doing the kind of work in the background. And it's our job to kind of keep them, like we horizon scan. So again, with the risk issues thing, we'll keep them like informed on what's happening in case, something's coming down the track, to kind of dodge that or navigate it. So yeah, it can be a mix of things, to be honest. But lots of kind of strategy, lots of actual tactical work to kind of deliver on that strategy. And yeah, just working together as a team to make sure the business looks good and sounds good and feels good.
Perfect. No, thank you for that. There is a question that came to my mind. I guess also just me trying to understand the day-to-day. So, like how in movies or even just on news, like the president of the US, something goes wrong and like the spokesperson for State House is the one there answering questions and whatnot. So you wouldn't necessarily, would you be the person answering, or you'd be the one coaching the spokesperson?
So both. It depends on the situation. It depends on the handling. I'd say, like particularly that the instance that you've described is quite common, I'd say, for the US, particularly and politicians and things like that's a whole different ball game with the comms. And that's not where I would like to be. But it's a different ball game in that sense. But we can be. So oftentimes you'll see, a spokesperson said, and last week we did some work and I was the spokeswoman that they kept quoting, but it depends on the nature of whatever the thing is, because typically if it's a bad thing, they won't want to be quoted. They won't want to be named in the quote, and therefore will use a spokeswoman or spokesman or whatever. But if they are confident and happy to be quoted, then it will be whoever that person is, whether it be the CEO or whoever, a senior stakeholder, then they'll be quoted. But sometimes, it's not happened to me yet, but there have been times where my colleagues, like their names have been quoted instead of saying person or woman or man. So that hasn't happened to me yet, but normally it's not a good thing if that's the case. So yeah.
No, thanks for that. I can see here a question that we've gotten. How did you deal with the applications or interviews, considering you came from a different industry? So I guess because you came from marketing and moved into comms, so how did you deal with the interviews?
I would say preparation is key and tailoring. So because whenever you apply for a role, you've got to do your research on the company, because when it gets to interview stage, oftentimes they'll want to see that you've, at least done some digging and tried to find out about the company to show that you are actually interested and that it's not just you kind of wanting a job for the job's sake. So tailoring, I think, is key. And so whether that's me kind of going through the annual reports of these different companies and finding what I particularly find interesting about them and then bringing that up in whether it be in the application stage or in the interview stage or in the cover letter, for example, that's, I think, where I've tried to differentiate and say that actually, whilst I'm coming from a different industry to your industry, this is what I can bring, and this is what I can add, rather than it necessarily being a bad thing, because I think having like breadth and variety is actually good. It helps you to kind of flex and be agile, which I think is needed as we get into kind of just as we move forward and things are changing so quickly.
Yeah. And you mentioned reading the annual report, and given that you check what's happening literally as part of your daily job, what would you recommend as a good sources to be abreast? Like it could even be you're not even looking for a job, but you just want to have good business acumen, to just know what's going on. What's the
Mhm.
best, given social media and how there's just too many news outlets, etc.? Like,
Yeah.
what sources would you recommend when it comes to knowing what's going on?
If you are time poor, which a lot of us are, I would say, there are certain scanners that you have to pay for that we use kind of through work. But if in terms of just for your general curiosity at home, something that's really good, I know my mum loves to watch Sky News. So even if you don't have Sky News, other news outlets do it. It's essentially what's on the papers tomorrow, and it tells you
Mm,
what's coming, and that's kind of like in one place you're getting kind of the headlines so you can see what's happening in the world. Or if it depends, if you've got time on your commute, like find a couple of outlets. So it could be a mix if you're interested in particular sector, whether it be tech. You could have like your trade publications and you just sign up to one of those and get the digest every morning. But also having, say, like one of the main news outlets as something that you just check quickly in the morning every day. I think that will give you it gives you enough to kind of have a sense of what's going on. So when someone mentions something, you're not like, what? Like, what's happening?
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'd suggest.
Because I definitely, that's an improvement area for me. That's a development point. Like I get my news from Instagram, which is not the best place.
But
So
it's
um,
not bad though, because if you so Bloomberg, for example, I find
mhm.
like I was reading the other day about how the Goldman Sachs chief is giving up his like side hustle as a DJ or something, which I found
Mm,
really
mm,
interesting.
yeah,
But they do, I think certain outlets are trying to be more I guess current and appeal to Gen Z and those who are like literally just scrolling TikTok for news or scroll. And I'm sure there are TikToks that are focused on news, which probably
yeah,
do. So there are definitely ways to get it. It's just finding them, I think.
yeah, yeah. That's a good shout. I can see Joseph. So you joined late. You'll probably watch the whole video. Yes. This will be available afterwards, so make sure to catch up with it. And anyone else who's watching the replay. But so far we've just covered Joe's background. So which is covered in depth. So make sure to watch the video afterwards, just so you can catch up on what we've discussed. I think now is a good time to segue into this month's theme. So it's Black History Month here in the UK. And the theme, I did my research beforehand, and the theme is celebrating our sisters. So Black women who are doing making it big in the, at least contributing to the community. Basically, they've done something significant in the community. So Joe, just a random question: who's your role model? Like, which sister do you look up to and you draw inspiration from, and why?
I'm gonna say two people, only because I was thinking about this earlier, and I think so. The first person I'm gonna say is my mum, which is probably like, oh, of course you'll say that, but I think for anyone in the diaspora who's kind of come and you has seen how their parents have worked to kind of build a life for themselves and their families, and have seen how, like particularly in the UK, how they've been working in a system that is not set up for their success, but despite that have made it and have really just like done it with excellence and grace. I think that's something to be really proud of. So my mum, and then I think in terms of like Black women in kind of, I guess, like the industry or the world who are well known. Michelle Obama is probably the first person who comes to mind, and I think partially because of her like philanthropy, but also because she's kind of carved this own like she's carved her own way like post White House. Like she's not just like the first lady and like Barack's wife. She's carved her own path. She's written books. She's been really kind of vulnerable and honest about things. And I just rate that she's out there like trying to help others as well as being, who she is
Yeah.
and telling her truth.
Nice, I love that. So for me, when I thought of it in two facets, like women and then just Black women. So
Mhm.
women, the first person that comes to my mind is Ruth. Bader Ginsburg. So I don't know if you've watched the movie On the Basis of Sex. So she basically fought for this gender equality through a man, like she used a man who was facing gender discrimination when it came to tax laws, etc. And through that, it opened a whole can of worms that showed other laws in the US that discriminate on the basis of gender. But just if you watch that movie, you will fall in love with her, like her tenacity and everything. So genuinely, that's the first person that came to my mind. But when it comes to a sister, I have so many in mind. And when you actually mentioned your mom, I'm like, yeah, actually, my mom is my role model. She's my inspiration. And then there's cliche. I think I can definitely mention Chimamanda. I just love her books. I've listened to her books. I stand for what she stands for. I've listened to some of her YouTube videos, her talks, and I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to be more like that. She's definitely in my wavelength. So not to be here till for hours on end mentioning other people. I think those few names I've mentioned are definitely an inspiration for me. So, and if you notice, Michelle Obama does fall in line also. Like we're on the same wavelength when it comes to who we're drawing inspiration from. But before we continue, I can see Joseph has put a comment saying, on the point of doing research to prepare for the interview, it's so true. I learned my lesson from experience, so I happened not to have done enough research. Next time I will be prepared. Any comments on that? You wanted to add on, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, as you say, it like you've learned, so like what it cost you ultimately, and had you maybe had the time or been able to kind of do more prep, it might have turned out differently. But I mean, I think we all kind of land where we're supposed to in the end. But just prep for anything and everything. Especially if you're someone who's quite nervous going into interviews anyway. I think being a bit nervous is normal. But if you're someone who's quite nervous about interviews, like there's nothing better than like preparing yourself to the T, so that anything that they ask you, even practicing out loud, that's one thing that I do. Even when I'm on my own, I'll sit and I'll write down the questions that I think I'm going to get asked or that could be asked, and I'll say the answers out loud. And it just helps me get into that headspace when I get in there. So yeah, just keep at it, keep doing it.
Yeah, practice makes perfect. Thanks for that, Joe. So moving on to my next question that I wanted to make sure we have a discussion on. So you've risen through the ranks. For those of you who are not aware, Joe is a senior manager, so she's a big shot at her current firm. But as you're rising through the ranks, being a woman, being a Black woman, do you feel there are certain things you've had to do differently, or certain experiences you want to maybe highlight that because of your ethnicity and your identity, you probably had to navigate them a bit differently? Just, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and it's funny because there's a partner at work who I used to mentor on this reverse mentoring scheme. And I remember the first session like that we had together, he asked me, is it harder for you to be Black or female, or be a woman? And I was like, to be Black, obviously, like there's women of all ethnicities, but like predominantly white in the workplace. So whenever I go into a room, instantly I'll know, like I'm probably the only Black woman in the room. And he was really taken aback, like, oh, I'd never really thought of it that way. And I guess if that's not your experience, then why would you? But it was really interesting to me that, because to me, I'm like, it's obvious, like clearly, but it just wasn't for him. And I think as a Black woman in an industry that's predominantly male dominated, and trying to kind of rise and progress, and especially if you're seeing your peers progress, and like it's not just about being excellent and being great at what you do. I think having a really strong network, and particularly senior sponsors, and people who make decisions, who can kind of guide you and just be an ear, is really important. I think for me in my career, that's been invaluable, to be honest, and it has helped in certain situations, particularly you know, when I've been going for promotion and, you know, I know I'm doing all of the things I'm supposed to be doing. I think also making sure that you are asking if progression is something you want to do, making sure that you're asking whoever is your manager or who is in control of whether you move to the next level or not, knows that you want to progress, but also is telling you, you know, ask, is there anything that you're missing? I'm doing all of these things. What else do I need to be doing to be operating at that level? And I think as a Black woman, you are acutely aware. I think in certain situations, I've been made acutely aware of that I'm Black, of my Blackness. I remember I was in a session with some senior people years ago, and I think it was the chief exec at the Times, chief of staff, assumed that I was like the assistant taking like the minutes and stuff. And I was like, actually, no, like I lead communication, like I lead the communications team. And they're like, oh, okay. And it's just like, then there's nothing wrong with being an assistant at all. So, you know, it wasn't, you know, that I was upset that he assumed that, but it was just the fact that he assumed that I would be the most junior person in the room type of thing.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure there are people who can relate who have been through the same thing. I just feel like there are often times where people do that, and it's how you deal with that whilst kind of balancing, you know, you're thinking in your head, like, that's not right. But you're also thinking, okay, but, you know, I've got a mortgage to pay. And so you're probably balancing things in your mind in terms of how do you kind of navigate and deal with something that you feel is not right, but also like making sure that you're shielding and not kind of killing off any potential opportunities for you to progress as you like to. And I think it's a personal thing to everyone, and you've just got to kind of manage that how you see fit and in a way that's comfortable to you, because one person's way might be like, oh no, I can't do that for you. But yeah, I do think it's tricky. And I think it's really good to see. So like one of the other women I was thinking about for the role models was Dame Sharon White, the lady that's the chief exec for John Lewis Partnership. Because like how many, I mean, I don't really have to think of like top women in the UK that are Black. And I think that it must be really kind of interesting for her, and no doubt she's faced like challenges and things that like we have yet to see, but it must be really interesting being in that space. But I think just being true to yourself and playing to your strengths as well, because one of the things that I felt as a kind of a junior, like when I was starting as an assistant manager to manager, I felt like, oh, I'm not as extroverted as like some people in my team, and that's what hold me back. And I wouldn't say I'm naturally extroverted, but I feel like with my job I kind of have to be. So I found like a bit of a balance. But I think playing to your strengths and read, like there's a book called Quiet by Susan something, which is all about the power of that introverts have. And it's really, really useful if you are someone who feels like they're not like the life of the party or the person in the meeting that's always giving answers. I'm more reflective, so I like to have time to think about stuff, then I go back. And I think recognizing that that's not a weakness also will help kind of like manage yourself in a way that works for you, but also get results. So yeah, I think it's tricky, but you kind of have to play the game a little bit, and just know what your priorities are and what you want ultimately, and try and navigate a path to get there with the support of the sponsors and the people who are useful and can help you. That's kind of it, I think, for me.
A few questions came to mind when you were speaking there. I think hopefully I won't forget any of them, but I'll start from what you mentioned like earlier on, that, you know, having mentors and sponsors has been fundamental in your career. Were those sponsors people who look like you, or have you found the most useful sponsors, you know, others? I don't know how to say it without being diplomatically correct.
Yeah, so I have one sponsor who didn't like he wasn't, it's kind of like an informal sponsor really. So the relationship developed because I do work for him. It's side of desk, but I do it because he's just great. He's the work that he does typically while he works in tax, and he's a partner. he also really champions Black progression and seeing Black people in leadership positions. So I use my expertise to kind of help drive like external profile for him, which is not part of my core role, but it's something that I do. And so I always say like he's my work uncle, but he's a sponsor for me, and he's the only one that looks like me of the sponsors and kind of mentors, I guess, that I have. So I think you can have sponsors and mentors for different things. So with him, I will definitely kind of go to him with kind of ideas or things that I'm thinking about. So if I'm thinking, okay, what do I want to do with my career next? He's very good at challenging me and making me think of things in a different light. But he's also good because if he thinks that my next best move is outside of the firm in a different company, he'll be like, who do I know that works in this industry, and let me connect you. Whereas some of the other sponsors that I have, whilst I think they would also be quite happy if I wanted to kind of move to somewhere else to support me, I think they'd be more inclined to try and keep me. And so I have different ones for different things. So the ones that don't look like me are still very supportive of me. And I think that's the key, finding a sponsor who will not only say like, I support you, but you'll actually see the fruit of that. And I think like there's a biblical verse which says, by their fruit you shall know them. And it's literally that, like you need to see what they're doing to support you, to know that like it's actual support, rather than, because as we've seen in the last however many years, people and companies making statements and then you hear nothing for like 3 years. So I think seeing what they give and what they do to support you is key.
Perfect. No, thanks. That's very well laid out. It makes sense. So it's more about what they're doing for you, not necessarily like you haven't noticed a specific trend that, it's only the ones who look like you that are coming through for you, or actually not. There's some times people like us who make it and they just leave us behind. So you might find you're finding more traction, or, even just more. The other mentors being able to receive you more than maybe the other one is exhausted because he's representing the whole community, basically doesn't have a break. So it's good to hear that. But I did want to also ask you, do you find yourself basically having different personalities or different personas? Like when you come to work, you have to put on a certain persona, when the real you is in the background wondering like, I want to cuss you out. And how do you balance it out?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I would say ish, kind of, but kind of not. So not to the point where I think like I'm literally two different people. I guess it depends, because so same as personal life, right? I have a few different groups of friends. Some I've gained through university, some I've gained through work, some I've gained through like meeting other people, just when I'm out and about. And like each relationship is different with each person. But I think at work, the one thing that I would say, so, and as you know, when we work together we have a Black network at work called the African and Caribbean Network. And one of the things that I find great about that is the people that I've met through that, some of whom are friends and will probably be friends for life, is that I feel that I'm most at home when we talk. So for example, during lockdown, I had a meeting with some of the guys from the Black Network, and I had my camera off because I was steaming my hair. Now, like people that don't have black hair, they'd be like, what are you doing? Like they wouldn't understand it. But and I'm not ashamed to admit that I did it either, because I mean, being productive here, I was working and steaming my hair at the same time. But I think knowing that I can be myself or feel like fully myself at work, even if it's not 100% of the time, I think that makes work easier. I think it makes the harder days easier and the better days even greater, because you've got a community that you can kind of tap into and share with. So it doesn't matter how you're feeling, you've got that. With kind of others who say maybe are not in that community, I've still got some great friendships and some great relationships. I don't think I'd say that I'm not myself. I just know my audience, and I guess how how and when I need to sort of cater to that audience, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And we have a few comments that I want to bring up on the screen. So I can see here, Techie B is asking what's next for you.
um, ooh, I don't know. I'm not aiming for partner because like that's just not my ambition. I don't know. Watch this space. That's what I'm gonna say. Watch this space. Hopefully, like, well, God willing, greater things, but we shall see what he's got in store for me.
Perfect, but we won't hold you to it if you become a partner, you know. It's still a good thing.
Maybe someone else. I think you have to be. I think you have to be a certain type of person, and that, like, I feel like if you go in and you're like, I want to make partner, I
Yeah.
feel like you need to have that mindset. I think once you see, because it's like obviously they earn big bucks, but to earn big bucks, you have to be out there in the market.
Yeah.
You're working 70-hour work weeks, even if you're not a partner, you're still working hours. But yeah, I just think that's not my portion. But look, give it to me, I'll take it. But I need help.
Perfect. I can see Lesego, who's joining us from South Africa. Hi, Lesego. So we've joined in from the West Midlands, but we're actually African by heritage. So I'm from Kenya, and Joy's from Zambia, and we do visit quite often. So I think we're quite in tune with our roots. And I can see George, who's applauding us. Thanks, George. And also Techie B saying congrats on achieving the milestones you have. It's inspiring. So you're inspiring us, Joe. Thanks for that. I'll just see if there is anything else I wanted to make sure. Oh yeah, I'll ask this last one, but of course, anyone who has joined us, please feel free to ask away as well. So what tips would you give to someone who's starting their career, someone who looks like us? What tips would you give them?
I would say experience. Get as much experience as you can from as early on as you can. So whether it is a placement, if you're going to university, if it's not a placement, think about internships. Even if, I mean, in this cost of living crisis, we all need money. So ideally a paid internship. But if you are kind of at the very beginning and you're struggling to get into anything, I'd consider an unpaid one if you can, just to get that experience on your CV. Because once companies see that, it's something that they can be like, okay, you know how to do X, Y, Z. I'd also say preparation, as we talked about earlier. Prepare for your interviews as much as possible. Pay attention to the details that you've got on your CV. As someone who recruits as well, there are so many CVs that I see, even from communicators, and sometimes I look and I'm like, how are you a communicator? Because like there's spelling mistakes here that like it's not making sense. But it's very easy to kind of just do a CV, think it's done, read it once, and then just start like sending it everywhere. But pay attention to that. Do your research on the companies you're looking into. Get experience. What else? Be curious as well. Be curious. And especially if it's, because there were definitely some times early on in my career, say like the role with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, I didn't particularly want it, but I knew that I needed experience, so I did it. I think don't be kind of averse to potentially doing something that you don't like, it's not what your end goal is. I think if it's going to help you kind of get there, don't be afraid to kind of do that and just try something different, because you never know what can come from it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a nice summary as to what one needs to do. And I'll add on, I know I said that was my last one, but I'll add on a semi question. But for someone who's feeling stuck, so they're already in a job, but they're feeling a bit stuck, they feel like they're doing everything they should be doing. What advice would you give them?
If you're stuck, I think understanding what it is that you want and kind of why you're stuck is key. Otherwise, how are you going to move forward if you don't know what the issue is? It could be that the issue is something that you just take to the next place you go to. So I think understanding like your why, like why, obviously we go to work because we want to get paid, but there are other reasons. You want to feel fulfilled, you enjoy, I don't know, the spreadsheets that you're looking at, whatever it is. Understand why you do what you do, like why it's important to you, and then kind of try and like pivot. If it's the company that you're not happy with and you feel stuck there, you're not progressing, look at others, see if you can move to somewhere that's got a good culture, and do your research again on that so that you're not in the same position. Also look at other ways to kind of learn, improve yourself, find other skills. It might be that you want to like switch careers. I have a friend who is a quantity surveyor by kind of trade and studies, who is like pivoting to tech, and she's done the quantity surveying for almost 8 years, but now she's starting from scratch as a data analyst, and she's managed to get a job with one of the biggest telecommunications companies in the UK, and has taken a salary cut, but it's worth it because her why is now different. So understand why and pivot, find things to help you to get to where you want to go.
I love that. Thanks so much, Jo. And as we discussed before, if we want to have Jo come back and even the tables turn, but I feel like you're the one with the wealth of wisdom and knowledge. I've been paying attention this whole time.
You've got some too. I really want to ask you questions. I'm sure the people want to know.
Yeah, but we'll be back. You'll see Jo back here. Thanks. I'm putting you on the spotlight, but yeah, Jo, we'd love to have you back.
I'd love to come back. Thanks for having me.
I think we had a very great discussion, and you can tell from the comments that we've received that people have learned a lot, people feel inspired. And yeah, I think that's a great way to end our live today. And I look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Belinda. Thanks for what you do for us.
Thank you. All right, cheers. Bye.
Bye.